Hello, and welcome to the Global Insight session at the Live Lounge at this year's Open Banking Expo Canada. We're here to discuss the lessons that can be learned from implementations in Brazil and the UK and providing that advice to the Canadian audience. My name is Marie Walker from Raidiam, and it's my absolute pleasure to be sitting down for this fireside chat with two absolute experts from those two regions. So we have Elcio Calefi, who is the CIO of Open Finance Brasil, the implementation and operation body for Open Finance in Brazil. And we have Adam Betteridge, who is the Open Banking, Fintech and Partnerships lead at the UK bank TSB. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
So we're here to talk about lessons learned, but let's bring it back to the basics to start with. Let's talk about the actual motivations for open finance. Why does it matter? Elcio, Brazil is such a poster child for the implementation of open finance you have, but let's take it back to the original purpose. Why does it matter? What has been impact for Brazil?
So, Mahi, thank you for welcome to Open Banking Expo in Canada. To talk about Brazil, we need to talk about decades of new building blocks that were building by central bank in Brazil to redesign the system. Like new entrants governance in Brazil, we have since 10 years ago, 30% more financial institutions working on the market. So this brings new entrants to the market that's highly concentrated. 80% of the deposits in Brazil are in the 5 big banks. So this is a highly concentrated market. So the Central Bank of Brazil designed a model that has 3 major building blocks: new entrant governance, the payment system, and open finance system. So with these 3 building blocks in Brazil, we enhance the customer-centric driven approach to let the customers and the companies, principally the small and medium enterprises, to be better served by financial system in the ecosystem. What we saw, we already completed 5 years of this open finance agenda. What we saw is 40 billion API calls per month. We saw the biggest banks of Brazil as the heavy users of open finance, not the fintechs. The fintechs is a heavy user, but the big banks are a heavy user too. So this is what we build and why we build in the beginning of open finance in Brazil.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. Some of the statistics out of Brazil are ones I quote regularly. So 30% more SMEs have access to credit because of open finance. So it really is, a hugely impactful regime that has been established there. Adam, going to the UK. So quite famously, the UK went further, fastest, quicker than other implementations, specifically Europe, because we were both reacting to the same regulation. And in the UK, it was a competition remedy because the Competition and Markets Authority wasn't happy with how the retail banking industry was performing. Can you talk a little bit about why it matters in the UK and whether that motivation and purpose has changed over the last 8 years?
Yeah, of course. And Marie, thank you for having me today. It's great to be here at Open Banking Expo Toronto. So back in previously the Competition Markets Authority order that you've alluded to, they understood that was a lack of competition between the big players, the small players, a lack of transparency for customers where they can compare whether they're getting good value for products, and a real lack of innovation between payments and data being shared between. So brought about open banking to kind of bring the CMA9 primarily along the journey, along with other players, to how do we open up competition and allow consumers to get the best value. And I think reflecting on it now, you look at January this year, 17.5 million customers now using open banking, over 30 million payments per month. I think we've seen some real good development in the UK that's kind of alluded to what the purpose was that the order kind of issued back previously in the previous decade. So I think the findings are now really beginning to show.
Yeah, and payments specifically was not initially one of the sort of use cases that was really thought about when implementing open banking in the UK, yet that's been one of our biggest success stories. So we've talked a little bit about why it matters. What I'm really interested in, and staying with you, Adam, is why it matters to TSB. So, and this is really interesting for countries like Canada that are about to implement. TSB was not mandated to take part, yet you have leaned in quite heavily, are one of the leading banks in terms of your approach to open banking. Why is that? Why does it matter to you?
So I think we have a strong customer base that if we were not leaning into something as revolutionary as this and where we did see the future going, we would not be able to offer the fair kind of same products to our customers. So, or yes, the CMA9 were mandated to follow this. We thought that this is the right thing to do. We know that we're still able to offer good products, good services, and APIs available for our customers to use with third parties. And we know that looking at APIs, this is building the future foundation for the rest of our technology infrastructure. So it did take a number of discussions. It is a lot of investment to kind of where you're mandating to kind of come along with the compliance activity, but it's looking at the future. And that's where the UK really is now, is where the commercial models are, where the incentives are for banks like ourselves to really turn the dial and make sure that we've got really good propositions for our customers and offering good services.
Yeah, it's really, really good to see. And we're seeing that around the world as well, as it's moving from a compliance exercise to an opportunity. And we're seeing that with financial institutions in countries that are earlier stage even than Canada. But going back to the success story that is Brazil, you have 1,000 institutions, nearly 4+ billion API calls per week. Clearly, it's working. Clearly, there is intent from the market to take advantage of this as an opportunity. How has the mood in terms of stakeholder engagement with open finance changed over the years in Brazil? What are you seeing in terms of the why for institutions nowadays?
As a big change in the market as open finance is, the first phase of all how was the mood of the institutions was compliance. Everyone was what we have to do to be compliant as the law, to be the infrastructure ready, to share data, to make the payments between the banks flow in a private lane with the public lane that speaks is in Brazil. So in the first year was the run to be compliant, to accelerate technology, and to see what's the first use cases that needs to be ready to set to the customers and small business companies, the impact of open finance. And this is a key decision that the market and the regulation needs to do. What's the main goal in the first year, besides accelerate the agenda, besides choose what the schema has to be shared between the participants. So this was the first movements. I think in UK was the same. It's a new one. But what we saw now uh, happening, that fintechs, credit unions, and the big banks are with the open financing the core strategy of relationship with the customers in the risk management, in the credit proposition, in the CRM, customer relationship management. That's important, and impacting cash flow of the persons and cash flow of the people. So we see open finance in Brazil in two great agendas now. That is a strategic agenda for the participants and for the government. That's credit and payments. So if I need to reinforce these two main agendas, because this is what moves the productivity in Brazil, what moves the business in Brazil. Credit and payments help the companies and help the persons to make more valuable with the open finance agenda.
Yeah, so solving the problem of access to data and a richer source of data unleashes the ability to innovate. And I think what's interesting for when we talk about use cases and the value proposition of open finance is that it's not just about the tangible better savings rates or the better credit risk. It's also about all the efficiencies in terms of onboarding and risk management in the back office that really starts delivering value to everybody. Easier access to credit, but also easier underwriting for the issuers of that credit. So that's a little bit about the use cases and the adoption from the consumers. How have you seen that in Brazil? Is this becoming an accepted and ever-present, unseen part of their daily financial lives? Or is it still a sort of education piece as to why they should share their data and for what?
Uh, I think both, because in Brazil you have 200 million people, and you have different kinds of access to the technology, different kinds of access of financial education, different kind of needs to use financial services. So I think Open Finance is democratic on this sense. And let me, in Brazil, every person or business has at most 5 accounts. One account for investment, one account for entertainment, one account, but it's at medium 5 accounts. Nowadays, we have 30 million people that connected their accounts, that can see their balance in their credit card bills and investment between their accounts. So this is for one purpose for persons. What we saw in Brazil, that is, with the launch of Pix in 2020, that's the brother of Open Finance in Brazil, that was launched in 2022, and the pandemic, the digitalization of the population to access financial services was exponentially grow. Exponentially grow. So with this behavior of the population, with the digitalization, with the use of different services from different institutions. So Open Finance connected all the dots and gave to the institutions the 360 vision of that customers or of that companies. And let me talk about the small and medium business companies in Brazil. That's 80% of the companies in Brazil. So 80% of the company is one partner and running a small business. They almost 20 to 40% has a business account. The others use the personal account to run the business. So you need to see if this pattern happens in Canada, because this pattern is concrete in Brazil. So Open Finance could connect the personal account with the business account to see the role process of financial inclusion of that company with the person. So this is the look that the regulators and the market has to take care to see what is the schemas that and the purposes of connection that needs to be done to affect straightly directly the population and the small business.
Yeah, I love the idea of open banking being connecting the dots. I mean, that brings it down very simply to a nice visual. Adam, talking about the enablers for what the regulator is looking to achieve and how that actually directly impacts on the banks and the financial institutions, what do you think have been the critical enabling factors in the UK?
So looking back, I think having a single common API standard, so making sure that all the banks have common APIs that fintechs can dial in, and they're not trying to build something different for every bank that they're trying to work with, has really enabled open banking to grow. I think having some consistent approaches around the user experience and data protection, and making sure that if a customer is going through an open banking journey, they're not seeing something different when they go from bank A to bank B to bank C. And it means that they'll actually have the real kind of familiarity with the service. And other things that when you've got new services, new technology, you need it to work. So having the availability at 99.9% is really important. If a customer goes to make a payment using a new technology format and it doesn't work, they'll be, I'm not going to use that. Like, not having it available to work there and then when they need it in the moment loses that trust. And I think trust is one of the most important things about open banking in the UK, is making sure that consumers and organizations can actually trust that what they're doing is going to work and what they're doing is safe.
That's a very nice segue to me being able to say that obviously Raidiam, the company that I'm representing, provides the trust services in Brazil, and was instrumental in designing the ones for the UK. And I completely agree. However, it's orchestrated, having those standards, having conformance of the APIs to the standard to make sure that actually they do work, and having that discoverability with the directory of where the APIs are and who the participants are in the ecosystem and what roles they are allowed to play is a critical enabler. And as we start to look broader into open finance in the UK and elsewhere, then that is, I think, those rules and the permissions is a critical part. We're getting to the end of our time here. Elcio, can I ask you, if you had one piece of advice for Canada, starting out, what are the critical enabling factors that you've benefited from in Brazil that you think are translatable to the Canadian market?
So, first of all, you start with a strong technical body to set up. In Brazil, we didn't start with a strong. I was a volunteer. So if Canada can start with a strong technical body, this will be mind shaking and we will enhance and accelerating the agenda, I think, too much. So this is the first advice that I can talk. Think observability since the beginning. If Canada decides a centralized, a hybrid, or a decentralized architecture for the open finance, I don't know what's the choice of Canada about the architecture. Either of them, you need to think about observability. Observability to see what is happening between the business communication between the participants, between the fintechs, between the banks, to make statistics, to see if the system is working, to see the problems of the system. We think about it to after the first phase or after the second phase. So was a lesson learned from Brazil. So a strong technical body and think about observability since the beginning, I think is key elements to the successful of the agenda in Canada.
Adam, from the UK's perspective, 8 years in, what would you recommend if things could be done differently from how the UK did? What were the lessons learned for the Canadians?
So I think we've delivered things that have worked, but it has taken a while to get there. So I think the plan would be that make sure that once you do have a technical roadmap, make sure the roadmap goes beyond just implementation. Make sure that you've got a plan for once it is implemented, what's next, what's coming after that, and you've got a real roadmap planning for consumers and use cases and what's going to add real value to the customers. And I think what's really important is making sure that you do have a commercial model that's going to be defined, making sure that you do have the buy-in from banks that will be potentially opening up data access as to if they're sharing data with fintechs or if the fintechs are sharing data backwards. What is the commercial model there and what is that defined so they have the motivation and they make sure they are opening up access to customers?
Yeah, so critical enabling factors like how do you deal with reciprocity? How do you deal with monetization? How do you fund the ecosystem? And also not trying to think too big, starting with the obvious, simple use cases first. Gentlemen, we could talk about this all day. And largely, I think we will be at the expo for the rest of the day talking about these sorts of issues for Canada. But thank you so much for joining me. And enjoy the rest of the day. And hopefully this was of some use to you as the audience. There is a lot of material written about how lessons can be applied from different implementations around the world. But it's always great to just hear it from the people directly involved themselves. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you.